Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Return to the Realm, a rereaders podcast for the Realm of the Elderlings series by Rob and Hobb. I'm Kayiu, and I'm joined by Alex and Leah, and today we're going to be talking about chapters 11 through 15 of Assassin's Apprentice, the first book in the series. So, like I mentioned last time, this is, uncontestedly my favorite section of the book. It has lots of really emotional moments, so I'm I'm all buzzed to be talking about this.
I
And excited to hear what you guys think about it.
was
Um,
definitely dreading reading it a little bit. Not gonna
oh
Yeah,
lie.
yeah, it's also a very painful section, but yeah.
I think it's the
yeah.
So
first really painful section we see, and it just gets worse from there.
yeah, and it's like because bad stuff does happen to Fitz earlier, but it's not on this scale.
Yeah,
Like,
it's not like earth shattering for him. He's like, oh, this is
mhm,
fine. Like, I can get through
yeah,
this.
Yeah, this is his first of very many near-death experiences.
hmm and also just straight up abuse. But yeah, so the first chapter of the section is chapter 11, Forgings. So essentially, this covers Chade and Fitz's return to Buckkeep, kind of reckoning with the aftermath of what happened in Forge and uh, how the kingdom is trying to deal with, or in the case of the monarchy, not having any idea how to deal with this new phenomenon of forgings. Um, and then uh, at the end of the chapter, Fitz meets a certain character who ends up being the main focus for the next two chapters. But yeah, um, yeah. I guess to start off, a comment that I think Alex made, which was, I didn't realize they called their gods elders, which it was something that I didn't notice at all either. And I was reading it, and then there was a line where it's like El, the first elder. And I'm like, did Hobb really just take L from elder? Because if so, that is the most scuffed naming scheme that I've heard in a while.
I feel like it's possible, especially if he was the first one. They were like, this makes sense. But then how did they get? I pronounce it Edda, but it could be Ida or something.
hmm
Where did they get that from? They were just like, we've got the first one, so let's just chop off the L and make it
I
that.
guess it could be a really rough way of like yeah, just like elder without the L. But I don't know.
That's as good a guess as any, I would
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I guess another thing from that intro section that uh they talk about in that intro section how the legend of the Pocked Man came to be. And they mentioned that it's a tradition that originated with the Out Islanders. And this is a bit of a stretch, but I wonder if if part of that uh came from sightings of Prilkop because the way that they kind of describe the reverence or uh kind of fear reserved for the Pocked Man reminds me of how the of the of Prilkop are treated in a Fool's Fate. So obviously I don't think that Prilkop is physically pocked or whatever, but I think from a distance you see someone who is extremely creepy and you're like, oh man, this fits with some sort of existing local lore and just blossoms up from there.
Yeah, and they don't get close enough to see because he's scary.
hmm
I could see that. The thing that I took the most from this intro is just when you that kind of puts into perspective how deep this superstition goes in these people. So it makes you really realize how terrifying it would have been for those refugees from Forge. Like this terrible thing has just happened to them, and their people are robbed of every semblance of humanity. And then all of a sudden they see this mythical figure that they associate with doom Like, that would be truly horrifying.
Yeah, how much worse can it get after all of this? And then they see the Pocked Man and they're like, we're all fucked too. Now we're gonna get forged or something.
There's
Yeah,
like no way to process that.
it like makes you a little bit more sympathetic for the fact that they tried to stone him, not saying
Yeah.
that it's okay that they tried to stone him, but they're also just like out of their minds scared.
See, okay, I can almost respect the stoning thing because in that moment, the fact that the fight won out over like the flea is like impressive. Because that
Right?
was me in that position, I would be hightailing it in the opposite direction.
Same. I would have run. There's no way I would have found stones to pick up and throw at him.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's same.
Um,
This chapter kind of feels a little bit fillery. When I'm looking back through my notes, I'm like, what really happened? It kind of seems like Fitz just goes to town and hangs out with Molly a little bit, and then like he meets Patience at the very end, and that kind of sends us into the next part. But one thing I noticed is that Molly's still calling him New Boy, so I wondered if he just has never given her an actual name.
Yeah. He
I
He just
mean,
thinks
yeah.
yeah.
that
I mean,
he is his son.
before next chapter, I feel like the names he has had are Boy, Fitz, and New Boy. One of which
Yeah.
Yeah.
is functionally similar to New Boy, and the other of which he cannot tell her for fear of exposing who he is. So,
Yeah.
And she's never asked. Like, that seems weird to me that she was never like,
Yeah,
hey,
it's been years and she's like still calling him this nickname. And that's it.
right.
yeah,
That they
I
just
thought
made
it was
up.
weird too, but then I think it's also because when they meet again when he's older, he introduces himself that way, and I think it's kind of just like she just kind of accepts, like, yeah, oh, okay, you're just called
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
They, but yeah, I feel like at some point, especially when like the part a few chapters earlier when Molly uh or Fitz reads Molly's real name from those tablets or whatever. I kind
Oh,
of
yep.
I kind of feel like that would have been an opportunity for her to be like, okay, now that I know my name, what's your name, kind of thing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, definitely.
but yeah, I do feel like this chapter is like pretty transitional, but there's also some interesting stuff going on because I feel like it's the first time that we're really seeing the cracks in the monarchy on a systemic level rather than like a personal level of these people are kind of shitty and not actually don't actually have the virtues that they claim to be because um there is like yeah there's Verity was raised to be second not first, something that Shade says, and I think so he ends up being too passive and reliant on someone else to take initiative, and by the time he does end up taking initiative in the second book, it's almost too late, and him taking initiative at that point kind of opens up a power vacuum. Um,
Yeah.
and Shrewd is just like more willing to ponder solutions to a problem than actually implement anything. So,
Yeah. Because he
I
wants to have the right solution.
mhm.
I wonder if there was a chance for Regal in this section to possibly turn it around, but Shrewd just gives him too much freedom and like doesn't handle it the right way, and that ends up making it worse. Like if he
Yeah,
would have
because like Regal is nothing if not someone who takes initiative. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I
I
think
didn't
if
even
Shrewd
think
was
about that.
truly a clever king, he would essentially play on Regal's like motivations and understand them in the sense of like, hey, economy will go bad if forgings continue. You like money and economy, right? So get out there, do something, figure out something to do about it. But he doesn't truly see a lot of the people around him.
He just coddles him instead of trying to like foster growth in him.
Yeah.
Hmm. That's because
One thing
there's
I
oh sorry,
noticed,
God.
I was just gonna say, one thing I noticed in this chapter is there's a couple times prior in this book where Fitz mentions like questing out towards people and feeling them out. And it's not really specified whether that's skill or wit, just because Fitz doesn't really know what it is. But he does that once when he's just like hanging out in the stable. He quests out for shade, and Burrich can tell, and he's like, "What are you doing? There's not even any animals here." So that indicates to me that all this time he's been questing out, he's using the wit, just kind of feeling it out, because if he was using skill, Burrich wouldn't be able to tell at all since he's blocked.
But could it be like a mix of the two? Because whenever Fitz starts really getting into the skill, like I think he says it happened so naturally, like it was so easy for me to open myself up and to like connect minds and all of that stuff. So maybe it's something that he mixes together with the wit and he uses kind of as one until Galen like stuns him of it.
Yeah, I suspect that, especially given like what we hear of how Dutiful uses it in the second trilogy. Um, I think that like once Fitz like starts to recognize the skill, he like separates it. But I think before that, I have to go back and check. But I feel like there are a few sections where like, the way he talks about using the wit uh, also has like this thing of like, huh, this feels very skilly.
And I feel like he can't, like if he was only using the wit, he wouldn't be able to quest out to Shade that far away, right? If Shade's up in his tower and Fitz is in the stables, that's kind of a far distance to just be using the wit.
Yeah.
Well, there's a few times where he kind of has a wit sense of essentially the whole of Buckkeep Castle. The most notable one is, I think, in the next book when he's meditating with Ketrican. Um,
And he just opens himself up to like all life around him. But I
there's
feel like
also one thing earlier in this book where I remember him doing that. I don't remember the exact chapter. Yeah.
I feel like it'd be easier to open yourself up to everything and feel it all than try and pinpoint and pick out one specific being though.
That's entirely fair.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But yeah, speaking of the wit, one thing that I found really interesting here that I did not catch on previous reads is like the way that I just like I think I kind of just glossed over this part, but like there's kind of this implication that Molly also has like some level of like wit sense.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I didn't have to look at Molly to feel her there beside me. I viewed it as a extension of my strange new sense, and I marveled that Molly seemed to feel and react to it as well. And like outside of those quotes, the part that really like got me was like there's a thing where he describes like pulling away with the wit, and she starts like turning to look at him, and
Like
like
what's going on? Why are you pulling away?
yeah, and also like it reminds me a lot of like Fitz when he can't use the wit. He's like, oh, I actually have to like look at people now. I can't just like wit sense them. So it's like, and that also that puts like an entirely new spin on like their companionability because they just it makes sense since like there are times that they can just like vibe with each other. So
Well, also I think in the last trilogy we see Molly using her wit with her bees when they like come and like they're all over her and they just like love her. I think that she has always had that connection with bees, especially even now in this book, with her like candles and the beeswax.
In Assassin's Quest, when she uses the bees to like scare off regal soldiers.
Hmm. Yeah, she's definitely got the wit. And I think that she knows, but she tries to keep it really, really quiet because she knows she grew up hearing about it and how bad it is. So she knows that she would get persecuted if she kind of let this be known. And I think she probably is scared to even tell Fitz because she maybe doesn't know that Fitz has it too.
God,
It
yeah,
makes me
okay.
wonder. There's always like talk about how it wouldn't have worked. At least I see this like a little bit in the fandom, how it wouldn't have worked for Fitz to be with Molly while Night Eyes was alive. But if she has some understanding of the wit or experience with the wit, then I feel like she'd be more understanding than people
Yeah.
give credit for.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's also something that's like expressed in book where Fitz is like, will like will Molly like understand this? Like,
And Night Eyes thinks she won't.
yeah. And
That's just because I feel like Night Eyes wants him to be with Kettrikin. Like,
Yeah.
that's all that's about.
He's a
She's like
shipper.
shipping the wrong people.
Yeah.
well, I mean also like Night Eyes also like didn't begrudge Fitz the relationship with Molly. I think it's mostly just like I think it just ends up being that like he can see that like pining after Molly at the point of that Fitz life is at will kind of do him no good because there's lots of other stuff that Fitz will like that Fitz cares about that will like preclude that. So it's kind of just like dog. Like
Yeah, Night Eyes doesn't see the point of like longing after anything ever.
Yeah,
yeah. It's like live in the now, brother.
that's
Yeah.
definitely easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
But Night Eyes says, it's easy.
Right.
I cannot wait until we get Night Eyes. I love him so much.
I know.
Him and the Fool, I think, are two of my favorite characters. So, like, the fact that we're seeing more of the Fool in this section, and then the fact that we're, like, getting so close to getting Night Eyes, like, oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait.
But yeah. I think it's also like it's because like they're such good like they're the closest people to Fitz and they have like such a good dynamic with him. And it's just like
They're
e- e-
playful. They're
yeah,
not
every
serious
time they're
all the
around,
time.
it's just like
They're
good
making
times.
fun of Fitz or, like, they're just bantering. Like, I love it.
Yeah, the
There's
first
no comic relief until you get more Fool and then Night Eyes comes in.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, the start of Tawny Man, where they're just like chilling in his cabin, and Fool pulls out the apricot brandy, and they're just like shooting the shit. Like that
I
is,
love that.
yeah. Can we just maintain that for eternity? Yeah.
Yeah, can we just have that in a book and like no one will get bored. It'll be perfect.
Um. Oh, another thing that I noticed on this read that I did not pick out before is, um, Fitz like offhandedly mentions that Cobb goes to this place called Turlake with Regal, and I was like, oh, could this be where like the seeds of Cobb going bad were like laid? Like he goes off with Regal, and Regal gets a chance to like kind of poison his mind and like talk him into becoming his assassin, kind of thing.
I feel like Cobb was on the path to go bad the second he became Regal's like personal animal man.
Agreed.
I don't know how to say that better, but you know.
Yeah, they mentioned that in like another chapter earlier on where it was like
Yeah.
Bob became Regal's animal
Oh,
man.
okay,
I was
okay.
like,
I think
okay,
I missed that then.
he's in his pocket now. Yeah.
Yeah, because Fitz has to do more of the stable boy errands and like taking care of all the animals. He like stepped in for Cobb once Cobb was
Promoted.
promoted to evil.
Mhm. Promoted to evil.
I feel like that's exactly what had happened. He just didn't know it yet.
Hmm. Yeah, like I miss those nods. And so it just when I was first like reading these books, it's like Cobb evil. Like I can see it, but also like, wow, that I
It's
did I would
shocking.
have. Hmm. But like
Mhm.
the foundation is there if you look for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's little hints.
Hmm. Um, and
Well,
I
now
think
that we're on the
with that,
topic of Regal, I have one thing. Um, I don't know what this quote is even from, but I'll just read it. And Shrewd watched it happen and thinks not of his people, but only of how to assure that Regal can be safe and yet readied in power should Verity manage to get himself killed. I think this is probably Shade talking.
yeah,
Um,
it's Shade talking about like when he's talking about like the forgings and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that Shrewd is more worried about Verity dying because of everything that happened with chivalry and how he lost his first son, or do you think he's more concerned with keeping his favorite son Regal coddled and safe from like the harshness of like the real world and actually ruling?
I think he is almost using Verity as a sacrifice. Like, if Verity fights with the skill hard enough to like deal with the red ships, then obviously the skill will just consume him. So he's like,
Yeah.
well, Verity is gonna have to do that, so I better make sure that Regal is ready and safe.
Yeah, because it's not like he's got any other heirs, and it's not like he would ever like recognize Fitz as an heir.
Right.
And he sees Verity as just like a tool, and it's like I mean, he sees everyone, I guess, other than Regal as like a tool for the monarchy, and it's just like,
It
man,
it almost makes me wonder if Galen did something to Shrewd via skill to make him like this switch of we see him
Oh
prior
yeah.
trying to teach Regal like how do you like what are you gonna do with Fitz? Like he's being shrewd and all of a sudden he's just like this whimpering old man that's like coddling his youngest son and ignoring his responsibilities or shirking them onto Verity. It makes me wonder if there's something else going on because Galen knew so much about the skill that Shrewd didn't even know because of all the documents he stole from
Hmm.
Space City. So,
I didn't even think about that.
mhm,
I feel like that's definitely possible.
yeah.
possible, but I feel like the story is more compelling if this is just Shrewd being flawed, especially since
Yeah.
like we know that like around this point, at some interval here, probably slightly after Patience arrives, is when he starts getting like the pains and stuff that he has to start taking drugs for, and that probably like we know that it like puts him off kilter mentally and keeps
Yeah.
him unable to focus. Um, so he probably just has this thing of like the kingdom needs to be safe and my son needs to be safe, and he just kind of like ends up tunnel visioning on those.
Yeah.
Um,
I noticed Shade said Regal has become his favorite.
mhm.
So
Hmm.
it like indicates to me that that wasn't always the case. And I thought
I'm
that was
betting
an
it's
interesting
chivalry.
Yeah,
switch.
chivalry was always the perfect son, the perfect tool, the perfect everything.
Right.
And then he had to find a new favorite once chivalry kicked the bucket.
Yeah.
Right.
And it couldn't be Verity because Verity was always second in line.
Yeah.
Which means he's second best. Always. Something you said, Leah, actually sparked something. You said that Shrewd was using Verity as a sacrifice, and it's kind of funny that they in the Mountain Kingdom they call Kettrikin the sacrifice. So it's kind of like they're
Mhm.
both being used for that, and it's not obviously Regal or Verity's like real title, but I feel like it's definitely something that he adopts. Even now, I think, because he's sacrificing his like own health and his body for the kingdom.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's,
he makes
I
the
think, something
ultimate
that the Mountain Kingdom would
sacrifice.
expect Kettrikin to do. Oh yeah, he definitely does.
Right. Yeah, I
Which again,
didn't.
like no one believes in him. Like Chade does, or like I guess no one on it. Like Chade doesn't believe in him. Shrew doesn't believe in him.
Fitz
They
is like the
all,
only one who does.
yeah, even like the people of the kingdom are kind of just like, oh, Verity. Like there's this whole narrative built up around him, and in the end, he's kind of literally without him, the entire king. Like he like single handedly saves the kingdom essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, there's no way that they would have gotten out of that without him.
Hmm. Okay, and I think since we've discussed everything else in this chapter, we can get to the little ending sequence, which is we get to meet
Yeah.
Patience for the first time.
I love her too. She's one of my favorites.
Hmm. Yeah. So
I
basically, she's just kind of like sitting around in the kitchen. Fitz comes in and it's like, okay, who is this noblewoman? Why did she not just fetch a servant? Which is kind of like the first indication that, like, oh, okay, this is not like your typical noblewoman. And then
Yeah,
Fitz manages
she
to,
does things her own way.
fuck everything up and give off the impression that he is a
A
class A
drunk.
idiot. Yeah.
Yeah.
But honestly, I kind of get it because Patience is like scrutinizing him the whole time, and it just makes him super self-conscious.
Yeah, because he doesn't like people looking at him to begin with, and the fact that she's, like, openly kind of staring at him, like, that would make him so nervous.
Well, and she reacts right away, like as soon as he walks in the door, because there's a line that says, "At the sight of me coming in the door, she sprang up and put her hand over her heart as if she thought I were the pocked man himself." So
She
she,
definitely thought he was chivalry, and she was
yeah,
seeing a ghost for
Ooh.
sure.
yeah, again. So it's like she reacts to him, and then she just stands there staring at him, and he's like, Then he doesn't like he's just again his clueless self because after this exchange when he's leaving she asks, do you sleep upstairs or do you sleep in the stables? And only the royal family sleeps upstairs, so it's like glaringly obvious no one else in the world would either sleep upstairs or in the stables. And he's like, that was a weird question. Like,
Yeah.
I wonder who she is. And like it doesn't occur to him that like why does this person immediately know who I am just by looking at me? Like who else would know that but
Yeah.
chivalry's widow?
I feel like we just need like a button, and every time you press it, it just plays Shade saying, "Boy, for someone as perceptive as you are, you have some very odd blind
Yes.
spots." Just the story of
I
Fitz's
noticed
life.
I noted that line because I was like, this is hilarious. This is like the best description of Fitz of all time.
Yeah, and it's like, I guess we're getting into that, but like, it's the reason why I think rereading the series is so like compelling because when you first read, you just kind of take for granted that Fitz is a reliable narrator, and then as you read more, you're like, no, his perspective is the most skewed.
I
So
enjoy these books almost better on a reread because of things like that. Because
Yeah.
there's so many like you notice when Cobb's getting promoted to evil, and you know the characters so much better that like on a first reread you're like that was weird, why would they do that? And on a first read, and then on a reread you're like, oh, I understand why they did that or why they said that because there's this and this that happened in their backstory that you find out later or whatever. Like it's things
Yeah.
like this that I don't know. I think it's
It's
more.
the little details that you pick out
Yep.
that we all glimpsed over and just, like, didn't think that they were important because they were so little and mentioned only once. And
Yep.
then
and there's
those
so
are the things
many
that
of
I feel
them.
like we pick on. Oh,
Yep.
definitely.
There's like several in every one of these episodes we do where we're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that is, which shows how good of a writer she is that there's so many like little hints and foreshadowing and things you can tie into even like the last trilogy.
And I wonder how much of that was on purpose and how much of that was either subconscious or accidental, and
I
it
think
just happened to fit nicely.
I feel like she knows the character so well that it's like it must be natural at some point.
Mhm.
Yeah,
She's like, "These are my friends."
it feels like
Yeah,
the
like
most like natural writing that I've seen from an author.
yeah, like how a friend would react to something. And if
Mhm.
you're with these characters for like 20 plus years, you just know how they would react. And then as a reader, you're like, wow, that's such good storytelling. And she's probably just like, well, that's what they would do. They're
Yeah, I couldn't do it any other way, they wouldn't let me.
right.
hmm
Right.
Okay, we kind of already moved into talking about this with the Shade quote, but we're going to be moving on to chapter 12, Patience, which is
Woohoo!
basically all about Fitz getting to know the titular character. Um,
I thought the intro was interesting here. It's about the Islanders and how like they struggled with the red ships before the six duchies did. Um, and there's several like lines where they're talking about how the red ships would like demand their sons, and then there was like a societal struggle about their heirs and blah blah blah. And I was thinking about it because when I was reading it, I was like, this is weird because we know as rereaders that the Outlanders are very matriarchal. So it doesn't like they wouldn't care as much about sons going missing as they would about daughters. So I wondered if that intro was a colored Six Duchies interpretation of what happened because they are patriarchal and their sons would be their heirs, or if this is a plot hole.
A little
I
bit
think
of
it could be
column
a
A, a
little
little
bit of
bit of
both.
column B.
Yeah, a little bit of both for sure.
Yeah.
Because like we don't see any of the Out Islanders in this series, and it's not until like Tawny Man that like they actually get developed. So I could definitely see that like
Yeah.
in the early books they're just kind of like this faceless proto-Viking kind of proto-Nordic kind of just faceless society of villains kind of thing.
And there is like a culture struggle in Tawny Man between the two because they like just don't understand each other's way of like thinking in terms of heirs and structure.
Hmm.
So I could see how like there are plenty of times where they have to like switch the way they're talking about things in the Six Duchies to simplify it for themselves because they don't really understand this like matriarchal structure. But so I could see how they're like interpreting it. But yeah, it felt I was reading it and I was kind of like,
I didn't even think about that. I just completely brushed past it.
yeah.
I just kind of assume that it's like because there is a section in the series where they're like they talk about like what Kebble Rawbread was doing, and they're like, "Wow, yeah, it sucks because we don't have with the with the sons of the mother house gone, we don't really have the resources needed or something to like the income." Um, and so I just assumed it was something akin to that, but then like thinking about how it was described here, it's a little bit more like yeah, it's a little bit more like that was the only thing going on, kind of. Which we know isn't the case. Um, Yeah, so there's just like a bunch of lines that I love here. So it kind of starts off with Fitz waking up from his hangover, saying, "But youth is amazingly resilient, especially when feeling threatened." And I'm like, it's a pretty throwaway line, but I feel like it applies to a lot of other youths we see in this series in the future, obviously in much more dire circumstances. Everyone from like Wintro, Eliana, Dutiful, even B. Like
Oh,
one,
definitely B.
yeah, I think characters in this series in general display like resilience, but I think it's also notable how much of like the young characters kind of just
They
put
take
on
stuff
more
in
than a brave
stride
face.
more. Yeah.
Hmm.
Malta is a big one too. There's a lot
Oh,
of
Yeah.
situations
definitely.
Malta gets into where, someone would just give up and she like
She keeps going.
she's
Malta
so
literally the best character development in maybe
Oh,
and
any
definitely.
I
series.
was like I
I
remember
hated her
hated
guts.
her so much. And I
I
felt
hated
terrible because
her.
I don't want to hate female characters because they're so like few and
But
far
she
between
was
in
so
fantasy. And I was like,
bratty.
and I
She
have a
was the
teen
worst.
yeah, I have a teenage sister that was like being a terrible teenage brat while I was reading the live ship and I was
You
like,
had firsthand
I
experience.
was listening to the audiobook and I was like, I want to throw my phone. She's like making me actually angry.
I
And
loved
yeah,
her at the end, though. Her growth.
Oh, I
Oh my God. She's
I
like one
loved
of my
her.
favorite characters of all time
I
after
loved her
that.
in Many Wilds.
Hmm.
Like every chance we saw her, I was like, oh yes, I'm so happy I get to see
Yes.
Elsa again.
I need to read Rain
She was the
Wilds.
best.
Oh man,
Yeah, it's
she comes
good.
back. The,
Yeah, it's
mhm.
You've got to read that before we reread it so that you know
Oh yeah,
everything.
yeah. So it's actually a reread.
Yes.
Yeah,
otherwise we'll spoil
we're
on accident
yeah
because I
we're
can't.
Yeah.
breaking the branding. Yeah. Um. Yeah.
There was a line I loved from Burrich in this section. that I actually just like put in my notes app on my phone because I loved it so much. But it says, when you cut a piece out of the truth to avoid looking like a fool, you end up sounding like a moron instead. I just love that line. It's like poetic in a way.
And I feel like he kind of takes it to heart. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like he starts being more honest and like brutally honest because he doesn't want to seem dumb.
Unless he has, oh, Fitz, yeah. He is definitely more honest at this point, but I think Burrich does too. Like, Burrich is painfully honest at times. Like, if Fitz asks him a question, he'll just tell him whether it's an age-appropriate subject or not.
Yeah.
Unless
I
he's
feel like Birch thinks honesty is the best policy, even though sometimes you don't have to
it's
tell the complete truth to get your point
right,
across.
right.
He's just yeah, and it's also just like he's a very like simple, straightforward person. So for him, it's not whether it should be the telling of it. It's how do I say it? How do I put stuff into words?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm. But yeah, I love that line. Um, I have a like because I usually read it on my phone, so I have a bunch of stuff highlighted and marked up. Not so much in this book, but that is like one of the lines which I've like noted a bunch of times. Um, I don't know if there's anything there with his like use of fool. I don't, but like every time I see that word in like a important quote, I'm like, hold on, does this have anything to do here? Is there something important going on? Um,
Yep.
um,
Speaking of the fool, Shade is like very surprised when Fitz says that the fool talks to him.
And
And
I'm sure Fitz just thought it was a natural thing. He's like, the fool doesn't talk to
right,
you?
right. But then
yeah.
he's like, keep the counsel that he gives you, which I've found to be very interesting because it made me wonder, like, what does Shade know of the fool? Because we kind of get at least, I think this is maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but I kind of got the sense that Shrewd knows Fitz has like prophecies that come true because I think there's a part in the next book where he tells him where there's going to be a raid. Um, and Fitz kind of sees it through like a skill dream, but it made me wonder if Shade knows that about the fool or if Shade knows anything about like his origins because why else would he tell Fitz to listen to like the king's fool should just be this like child jester.
And we
I
see like
think
in
that,
Tawny Man, like he has like some research about like the fool's path to Jamila
mhm.
and not Jamila. I don't know how to pronounce it, but you know what
Yeah, we know which country you're talking about.
I mean.
I I think that Shay definitely knows what's going on with the fool and how the fool is more insightful than anybody else would think. Because I think that him and Shrewd have that close relationship. Like even if it's not like a brotherly thing, it's a very close, like working relationship. And
Mhm.
I think that Shade is the closest person to Shrewd and the one that Shrewd tells the most to. Obviously, not everything, but I think that maybe he like told Shade about certain things or certain prophecies that the fool told Shrewd to try and piece together what they mean or how they should go about handling what was going to happen in the prophecy. So I think
Okay.
he definitely knows.
Yeah, and it's also I feel like it's kind of ironic because how much he's like, yeah, listen to the fool, and then Fitz just kind of blows off the fool's prophecies, and then it completely
Yeah.
switches in the second trilogy where Chade is like, whatever, probably just bullshit anyways, and Fitz is like, no, he's gonna die.
They're legit.
Oh, holy shit, he's gonna die. We need to do something about this. Um, yeah, like he just becomes like completely antagonistic, and I think it
I
also
think
shows that
one
like,
note I made was it fits drives this book in particular because he ignores every single warning the fool ever gives him. Like, you're in danger. You're going to die. Don't eat that. And Fitz is just like,
Whatever.
whatever.
You
yeah,
don't know.
I think it points to like it's almost for the fool's vision of the future to come to pass, it's almost the giving of the warning that is the important thing rather than the following of it. Because it
Yeah.
shows that Fitz is still the catalyst, still makes things happen. Like it kind of just defies whatever. But as long as there's that like counsel, there's kind of like that almost in and of itself changes things, I feel like. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah,
But,
because maybe Fitz is even supposed to do the things that the Fool warns him against because it strengthens him or it like gives him this kind of experience that he needs for future events. And so the Fool warning him and being like, don't do this or keep an eye on this is sometimes, not all the time, obviously, but sometimes the Fool trying to push Fitz to still do it.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah. Also from that conversation with Chade is, and this is also where the line of uh, Fitz having weird blind spots, that we find out that uh, Chade is also a Farsi bastard. Um, which there's been a bunch of hints that we've noted before this, but like it completely stunned me the first time I read it. So it really shows like since we're seeing things through Fitz's perspective, it's really easy to overlook details that are still presented because Fitz also kind of glosses over them, and it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and I thought it was really funny because like right after this, um, like the Chade is like, oh, okay, so why do they call Galen Queensman? Can you guess why they call him a Queensman? And then Fitz is like, he was trying to lead me to some conclusion, but I cannot guess what. And it's like, I feel like if Chade hadn't been like interrupted by Fitz telling him about the fool,
The
like they would
Fool.
have got it.
He
He would
would
have
have
been like,
gotten into it.
yeah.
He gets so close because there's one part where Fitz says, sometimes they almost look alike. And Chade's like, do they? Hmm.
Why do they look alike?
Yeah, I wonder why they look alike. And Fitz is just like, the fool, blah, blah, blah. And then they kind of get distracted, but he really gets so close. But I like, on a reread, it's obvious to me, but I remember when I first read this, like when Verity eventually says his half brother, I was like, what? Like, oh shit. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like so easy to pick out, but I'm also like as clueless of a reader as Fitz is a narrator on a first read. So,
Oh, definitely. I think we all focus on the big story and like
Mhm.
what's right in front of us because we don't realize that these little details actually mean something.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah, and like one thing that really surprised me is like in the intro for chapter 14, they literally like they either they say or heavily imply that Galen is a Farseer bastard, and they mentioned that his dad was like one of Queen Desire's like personal servants. So like it's really not hard to like connect the dots from there. But like I completely missed that because they're like, yeah, usually learning the skill wasn't something that was given to Farseer bastards. So it was pretty weird when Galen got it. And I was like, huh? Huh? They just straight up say it? Did no like
Yeah. Well, because there's a part where I don't remember if it's in an intro or if it's like part of the actual narrative, but they say someone says something about Desire being more royal than Queen Constance because she has Farseer blood on both sides,
Hmm.
Mhm.
whereas like Constance wasn't like royal. So she's part of the family, which is gross, but also just like it makes sense then that Galen, despite all of what Galen is and ends up to be, he is like this talented young man and like talented enough that Solicites seeks to like foster that and takes him on as an apprentice.
Yeah.
Mhm. um I guess kind of like going back to the start of the chapter. Um I love like the little thing where like Fitz is like, did she like you when she first met you? And then Bird's just like looking into the camera like better than she does now. And it's just uh, that that whole like because you could there's like the seeds of like, oh, there was something going on between them. Especially with how like tenderly like Birch is like, oh yeah, I trained this horse. But
Hmm.
but because of just like how incredibly antagonistic they are to each other in like through Fitz, where it's like the patience is like, oh yeah, Birch taught you the habit of drink. He always has these horrible habits that he foists on everyone. And then
Yeah,
Birch
the
later
man
on
is
is
a
like, why
and a
would you want to
lecture.
please patience? Yeah, which is like, huh? Like that's like so harsh for like for why?
Well, I was wondering when she says all those things about Birch, do you think she's more bitter about like her and Birch's relationship and how his habits are? Or do you think she's more upset that he's kind of teaching Chivalry's only son these bad habits?
Both.
Yeah, I put a little bit of column B on the doc. I think it's more about teaching Chivalry's son bad habits because she comes here to find out what has become of, well, let's just say her son, Fitz.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it ends up it turns out that he hasn't been getting any education. To her knowledge, he's been used as a stable boy. And to put insult upon injury, he's been like essentially gaining habits that she thinks are like unbecoming of royalty. Um, and I think there's also the section where she probably didn't like Burge's drinking habit. Uh,
Back then
or
or to begin
yeah,
with.
and so that's
Mhm.
an additional sting.
Yeah, I can imagine that she is pissed that Chivalry's only son, who should have been heir, is not being as taught as well as the princes are or were, because he is just as much royal as they are. It's just he was born
Right.
on the wrong side of the marriage bed. Is that what someone said before? I think that's
Wrong
said
Mm-hmm.
side of
somewhere.
the sheets or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think she also internalizes a lot of it and then she lashes out. And like
Oh, yeah.
Burrich is an easy target for her because I think there's something that Shade says where it's like I that she's probably feeling badly and she's trying to make up for lost time, and then that the fool says later on where it's like she didn't like she only hated you for a little bit and then she didn't and then she wanted to raise you and they wouldn't have been
Yeah.
able to kill Chivalry if it weren't for her consenting. So I think she kind of thinks like if I would have handled it differently, then we could have raised him and he would have this education and he would have blah, 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 blah. He
And
wouldn't be like,
Chivalry would still be alive.
yeah, he wouldn't be stumbling into the castle drunk at night and sleeping in the stables. So she, it's easier to like lash out at Burrich about that than like
Then just carry that
carry it
weight all the
inside.
weight on herself.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I feel like she doesn't just lash out at Birch, she definitely lashed out at Fitz a little bit because she
Yeah.
said, "Those leggings make you look like a stork," and I just loved that. I thought that was so funny.
Yeah, and there's
I,
I think at the start of the next chapter, it's like stand up straight. No, not like that. You look like a turkey drawn out for the
Yeah.
axe. And I'm like, oh. And I
Oh
think
my
it's
god,
because
I
she's
love
just
her.
like she just does not understand. Like basically everyone other than Lacey in this book, she does not know how to talk to children. So she's just like, present yourself, look presentable. Like,
she just
But
has
not
no
like that.
filter. No
Yeah.
filter towards anybody. Like she even talks to Shrewd like that.
mhm,
And I
And I
think
love that she does that.
so many people just don't know how to like take her that they are just like, okay, like she's the only reason Fitz even gets to learn the skill because
mhm,
Because
she just
Shade tried twice.
yeah, she hammers away and Shade had been asking for God knows how long,
Years
probably
for
years.
sure.
Yeah, and then Shrewd's just like, I don't know how to deal with patience, so I guess you're gonna learn skill now.
Just to shut her
I
up.
love the description of like it's like they have horrible hangovers the next morning. That is like that's like how powerful her like persistence and just shouting at them is. But yeah, she advocates for Fitz to have everything that he deserves, and it's just like,
Yeah. And I feel like she's the first person to really do it because Burrich doesn't want Fitz to have that responsibility because he wants Fitz to be safe under his care and like still be a little kid. Shade just wants him to learn how to be an assassin, and Shrewd only wants him to be a tool. So Patience is the first one who's like, this is what you deserve, and this is what you should be getting.
Yeah, and like he has that like moment of ambition when he hears about it, and then a little bit of shame afterwards, and that always made me sad because it's like like his whole childhood, the monarchy has been trying to like stamp out any potential aspirations because it's like, oh, if he has aspirations, he's dangerous. But it's just
Yeah.
like, no, you can't like cut it out entirely. Like he's, and it's I don't even know that he like wants it for the sake of being powerful. It's just like
I think
it's
he
just
would be more
freedom and
accepted into the family.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I loved like the little like when Shade is like talking about why chivalry married Patience. I thought it was really interesting because in the end, Fitz tries to mirror chivalry by marrying for love instead of politics, but because he's the bastard son, like it just ends up not working out. It essentially the only reason it worked out for chivalry is because he was the
Royalty.
perfect in not just royalty, but perfect in all other ways and heir to the throne.
Yeah.
So
Speaking of the relationships, I think that Patience and Birch's relationship reminds me kind of Fitz and Molly just because it is that young love relationship.
mm,
Yeah, knowing the two of them, I don't feel like they would have been a good match long term.
Oh, for sure.
But they're just like holding a candle. It's like that, yeah, like that first love or young love where you're kind of just like obsessed with each other, whether or not
It's right or you
it
guys
or not.
click.
Right.
yeah, I feel like it's kind of hard to write something that feels like to write something where you can feel and understand the chemistry between the characters, but also show that it's kind of moved on. And I feel like lots of writers kind of fail at that. And I feel like this is kind of a good thing of like we also get to see Birch like move on in real time as the books
Yeah.
progress.
Do we ever see much interaction? I think the only time I remember seeing direct interaction between these Patience and Burrich was when Fitz was like dead or dying, right?
Yeah.
They kind of just like
they're willing
They
to
come
put all
together
of that
because of him.
aside. They're like divorced parents.
Yes. With their son. Because I feel like they both do view Fitz as their son. And so, of course, he can be the connecting factor, the thing that brings them together.
The uniter. And that's the only like reason that they will communicate.
Other lines that stood out to me. If I learned my trade well, I wouldn't be swinging a long blade at anyone. Well, okay, maybe technically not a long blade, but you end up swinging axe at people. Yeah, like I love it. Like Fitz is like weapons training, never gonna need that, and then he assassins like twice in the entire series, and the rest of the time he's doing like actual combat.
Yeah.
It's also why I think like this entire series being called Assassins whatever ends up setting up a lot of people with expectations that the book doesn't end up giving you because it's not really about assassination at all ever. So
And I don't think I don't think Hobb picked the titles. I think that it was the publisher who did that. Because I think she was titled it differently.
Yeah, okay, that explains why the titles are so bad.
I think I remember her saying originally it was called like Chivalry's Bastard or something, but that's not.
I like that.
Oh, I feel like, I don't know.
I feel like knowing that and like having read the book already, I like the title, but if I was just going to pick it up, I'd be like, what the fuck? Like, I don't think.
Yeah.
it would
I think like
pull me
Chivalry
in.
Shadow as like because that's one of
Oh
the
yeah,
chapter names. I
That's
think
a
that
good,
that would be,
yeah.
and I feel like
that
also
would have been
probably
great.
would go over a little bit better than Bastard,
Bastard,
just
yeah,
when, like with plaster on the cover. But yeah. Mhm.
I mean, I wouldn't have read these books regardless of titles if I had known there was going to be 16 of them. But I like fell
it's
into it on
daunting.
accident. So
It is a
then it
daunting
didn't
thing at
matter.
first.
Yeah, it didn't matter what the titles were because I was invested.
Mhm.
One thing I forgot that I always forget about Patience is that she's like covered in tattoos.
Oh, I know, I
Like,
love that so much.
she's such a badass. And she
I
was,
wish that
oh,
Patience would tattoo me. I would get
same.
anything if Patience tattooed me.
Mhm.
Same. She could design it and everything.
And
And
like
it
we
would
know
be like
that
snip and
she's
poke.
Hmm.
oh yeah, but like she has the precision, and she's like we know that she's like a good artist from everything that we hear later on, and like yeah, and I love that like I don't remember which chapters, but like start of one of the chapters when like I think it's probably 14 because like that's after Fitz and Patience get like a little bit closer. Like I just love this exploration of like yeah, you know, don't tattoo yourself, but you can tattoo me, whatever. Like,
Yes,
Yeah.
I loved that so much.
mhm. I feel like Fitz honestly would later in life. Does he get tattoos? I feel like he doesn't. I would remember
I
that.
don't think he does at all. I think he's
Yeah, I
got
think it'd be kind of. I think
scars,
it'd be
and
kind
like
of
that's what he's
cool.
got.
Like honestly, like
Yeah,
a Night Eyes tattoo or something, or just like honestly, and like I could honestly see like because the Fool does like carvings and a bunch of stuff. I could honestly see the
yeah.
Fool giving him a tattoo.
Oh,
That
for
that would
sure.
be.
But
Mhm.
I think the fool could never, just because of his like trauma from being tattooed.
Oh shit! Yeah,
Yeah,
wait,
I
never mind.
think
I
he
completely
would be.
forgot about the other set of tattoos. Oh,
Yeah.
the.
Yeah.
Mhm. No, yeah, that totally makes sense. I don't know how that slipped my mind. Um, but speaking of the Fool, this is also like the first part where like Fitz kind of like admits that he values the Fool's friendship when he's talking to Shade. He's like,
Yeah. He's like,
I
he's
know that
sassy,
everyone
but
else
I
thinks
kind
he's
of like
weird.
it.
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I wish that we got to see, and obviously this is probably selfish since like we get more of it as the series goes on, but I kind of wish we got to see like on page some of these like interactions that led to the
Yeah.
Fool and Fitz becoming friends
Yeah.
because there's definitely a little bit of like tell and not show going on there.
Yeah. We see their first kind of interaction with his first prophecy to Fitz, but then we don't really get to see much else until these later chapters. And they're already having that relationship developed.
Hmm.
Yeah, I remember on my first read when we get to the part in Assassin's Quest where he like the fool finds him in the snow and he's so relieved. I remember being like, when did they get to be like that close? That he's like, oh, thank God, my best friend. I was like, I thought they were like friendly acquaintances
Hmm.
Hmm.
because it kind of happens off screen. We don't see that like evolution of that relationship that much.
Hmm. Which, yeah, I think that's probably one of the bigger failures of the series because of how strong that dynamic ends up being. And like, again, I really love how it's portrayed in Tawny Man. Just like I'll take it for granted. But
Yeah.
yeah, like there's already so much going on in the series, but I think like since that's like such a big dynamic, I wish they would take more time. I wish that Hobb had taken more time out to develop it in the first series. Yeah. Also, speaking of characters I wish had more screen time, with Galen, um, there's they mentioned that like Galen has a fear of water, and I don't think that ever like comes up again. But like they give us like so much about Galen here, and I'm like, man. On one hand, I love that he like leaves the series early because it's interesting to see how like a villain who had like such a short stay ends up having such a ripple impact on Fitz's life throughout like next like 9 books or whatever. Um, but I also feel like there's so much narrative potential in Galen that was kind of wasted through that like swift exit at the end of the first book.
Yeah, I wonder why he's scared of water. I didn't pick that up or remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same.
I also like there's this thing of like Galen hates Fitz not just because like Fitz is like representative of chivalry's failure, but he always calls him like the bastard, the bastard, the bastard. And I'm like,
I bet it's projection.
exactly, like I feel like there's an element of like self-loathing there. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, I wish we got to explore that a little more too.
And that's why he kind of imitates Regal because he wants to be royalty, but he's never going to be recognized as royalty because he's a bastard.
Hmm. Um, is there anything else y'all have from this chapter?
Yes, there is something
Cool.
that I saw. So there's a couple things, I think, or there's just one. Um, where Fitz and Birch are talking kind of after Patience like goes and demands all these things for him. Birch says, "Well, Fitz, you have a way of presenting yourself to the very people you should most ardently avoid." And then a little bit after that, Shade says, "I'd have thought you'd have the good sense to avoid her." Like everybody thinks that he should know this and that he should like stay away, but he doesn't know Patience at all. Like he doesn't even know what she looks like. So how's he supposed to like know that that's her? And then I think it
Like
also
no one gave him a heads up that she's arriving. It's just like,
right. Like how was he supposed to know? And he was hungry. He needed some food.
mhm.
But I
And I
think
feel
that
like
also oh go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
I think that Fitz and Birch talking and Birch saying that it mirrors when Birch said something very similar after Shrewd notices Fitz for the first time.
Mhm.
Birch expects him to just know things that he never tells him.
Yeah,
He's like, "Oh, you shouldn't have let Patience see you." It's like, "Well, you didn't tell me not to let her
nobody
see
told
me."
him.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love the thing of like you shouldn't present yourself to these people, but I think in the end, like getting to know these people is what ends up saving Fitz's life, like literally.
Mhm.
So it's like I think that these chance meetings end up being more fortuitous than I feel like both Shade and Burridge are very like conservative, and they're like, no, just keep your circle small. Don't change
Yeah,
is
stay in the
bad.
shadows.
Yeah,
Don't
but
get noticed by anybody
every
because you
new
can get in
acquaintance ends
trouble.
up giving him a better life. I feel like. Oh yeah, one thing that you noted here that I thought was interesting. Um, but not even to Shade could I dare to reveal my fear or my taint. And it's just like, yeah, like even like Shade, who's like again like one of his several fathers, is he can't like the shame for this has been ingrained so much by both like society in general, but also Burrage.
And
It's just
Burrich
like,
for sure.
yeah.
I did feel bad for him. That's kind of sad. And,
Hmm.
like, I think that was strengthened, like, his thought, like, "I can't tell Shade this," was strengthened after Shade gave him, like, those weird looks when he, like, hightailed it out of Forge, because he's
Mhm.
like, "They didn't feel like I didn't feel them."
Hmm.
And then Shade's like, "What's going on with you?"
Yep.
Obviously, Shade ends up thinking that it's a skill, and that's how we get down this whole road. But
Mhm. It's not.
mhm.
I think the last thing I had was from Shade, and he said, "Be careful, for within the walls of the garden I have no influence. I am blind there." And I feel like on the second read, it is such an ominous thing. And like if that would scare me because I
Yeah,
feel like well, maybe Fitz doesn't realize how wide of a reach Shade has just yet, but the fact that he has no eyes there and like he can't protect Fitz for the first time is kind of it would scare me, that's for sure.
yeah, and I think that like even if Fitz isn't aware of like the exact range of the network, I feel like he kind of buys into Shade's mystique even at this point. Because
Oh,
like
for
the thing that because like there's that thing like a few chapters ago. He's like, Jade, are you the Pocked Man? And it's like, it's an incredibly silly question until you realize that like while Fitz like knows Shade as a person in one half, he doesn't know much about how Shade operates, like in the for the broader
yeah.
duties of the kingdom. So it's just like
And
it just seems like whoa.
If Shay could be Lady Time, like he could be anyone, right?
Hmm.
Like we really don't know how much his disguises could be, so maybe he could be. It doesn't seem like too silly from Fitz's perspective for sure.
Hmm.
Fitz is like remarkably optimistic before getting training, considering Shade, Burrich, and the Fool all warn him.
Yeah.
Be careful. And that it's like dangerous. He gets several ominous warnings and he's still like, I can handle it. I'll be fine. I'm going to learn the skill.
Yeah.
There's like a little element of like it's the one aspect of my royal birthright that Patience was able to buy for me. There's a and like I don't think
Yeah.
that's articulated that much, but like that's the vibe or undertone that I get.
I can see that.
But yeah, speaking of Patience getting fit stuff, are you all ready to move on to chapter 13? Smithy.
Yes.
Um, so we're still kind of in that dynamic of Patience and Fitz, and this entire chapter is basically focused on both of them trying to like figure out what's up with the other, essentially. Um, so we see like Fitz's like first like formal meeting with Patience, I think, knowing who she is now. Um, so goes up to her room, and because she's won this time with her by talking to Shrewd. Um, so yeah, I guess like just the first line I noticed is he's probably hungry too, isn't he, Lacey? I've heard that about boys. And I just love like the way she says it is just like this is the purview of boys being hungry.
And she's talking like directly behind Fitz. Like Fitz is in between them, I think. And she's like looking past him, like not asking him if he's hungry. She's like, Lacey, what do you think?
Legit just like yeah, he's not here. It's cool.
She's probably just as nervous as he is. She just shows it in a different way.
Yeah.
She's
Oh, for sure.
terrified.
Yeah, she's like terrified and like also I think it's probably kind of painful for her to look at him because chivalry has not been dead for terribly long.
And
And
like he looks so much like
he
chivalry, we're
looks
told again and again.
exactly like him. Yeah, it's probably like I can't look directly at this person.
I think it could also be she wants a relationship with him so bad that she doesn't want to mess it up and she doesn't want anything to mess it up. So she's like trying to do the right things, but she doesn't really know what those are. So she's just kind of like flubbing along.
Yep.
Yeah. Almost an interesting because I forget who said it earlier in this episode, but it's like it was like Patience kind of like just speaks her mind with everyone. And I think this is the first time where she's like genuinely like, oh no. I can't like say what I can't say that like, hey, I love you and I want you to be my son and please care
Yeah.
for me. Because he's like and so she's just like, how do I not say what's on my mind? And then it's just like
Just like here's a puppy, learn an instrument.
Yeah.
pretty much
Yeah.
exactly. And it's so sad because like the start of the chapter when she first gives him Smithy and he like zones out, and then she's like, I think something's wrong with him, and then Lacey's like, well, it reminded me of you. You like tend to doze
And
off
she's
when
like, it's fine when I do that, but he's a kid. He can't do that.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like Lacey is like so trying to get them to be like, you guys are like. She's
Very
like, hey,
similar.
here's a connection, but I almost feel like Patience is like she has a thing of like, no, he won't be like me. He'll be like chivalry, and that's not
Hmm.
end up being. And I think that like I think I'm assuming that lots of stuff that she tries to teach Fitz is
Is stuff that chivalry was good
yeah,
at or knew.
because there's a line at the end of the chapter. Where it's like your father could not draw a curved line save on a map, which is
When
probably
he
why she
gets
didn't try to like try to teach him art, because she just
Drawing
assumed that
because
he wouldn't have the aptitude.
yeah.
Yep.
The reality is, like, his knowledge of herbs, his love of like of drawing and scribery, he's a lot more similar to Patience than Chivalry in a lot of ways. So,
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
mhm.
I think it's curious that Patience gives him a puppy without knowing that that's like the one thing that would matter the most to
Yeah, she
Fitz.
just shoves it into his arms.
Yep.
She's looking for something, anything to give him, because she's like, man, I haven't been able to give him an education. I haven't been able to give him my love. I haven't been able to. I've secured the teaching him the skill, but I haven't got him like, yeah, it's like she just feels like she was not there for him at all, and she's like, ah. The- I feel so sorry for Patience. Like,
Me
yeah.
too.
And Fitz ends up being like so cruel here. He's like he know like at least at the start he knows how to like he kind of like understands that she cares about him and kind of like, but he's like being a petulant child about it. So he's like, yeah, I'm just called boy, and like he is like happy that like she doesn't like that and stuff like that, and
Well, I think he probably doesn't want her to call him Fitz. Like, I think that would make her so like, she would get pissed about that, and she'd take that to Shrewd, and he probably doesn't wanna make Shrewd have to deal with her anymore because he knows how Shrewd feels about Patience,
mhm,
He
and, like,
also
no one's given
like
her a name or him a name.
his only other experience with a mother figure abandoned him.
Yeah,
So I
it could
think
be some,
like
like, resentment or something.
subconsciously he always holds himself at somewhat of a distance from Patience. She's like yearning after him and reaching for him, and he's so walled up because he has like abandonment issues up the wazoo.
for sure.
I love that Patience named him and, like, just threw out a name for him because he wanted somebody to name him so badly before. He's like to Birch, "Well, like, you should name me." And Birch is like, no, I shouldn't." And he's like wanted that, and I think he kind of accepted that that wasn't something that he was gonna get. Like, he was just gonna either be called like Fitz or Boy or something. And then Patience swoops in and she's like, "You're now Thomas." Like, I
But
loved that.
he almost like resents it or rejects it or dismisses is
Yeah,
maybe
because
better because
he thinks
yeah,
she didn't put any time into it or any thought.
I think
But
he just pulled it
maybe she did.
out.
Maybe that's like what she wanted to call him ever since she found out about him. She's like, this is what we would name him.
Well, they used to, I think you find out, and I don't remember if it's Tawny Man or if it's in The Fool,
It's
but
Tawny
you
Man.
find out that Chivalry would write letters, Chivalry and Birch would write letters back and forth, and they would talk about a tomcat.
I think it was
And
Chivalry and Verity, but yeah.
they would just skill to each other, though.
No, I think what it was like they would send letters to each other, and then like at the end of the letters, there would be like little things that would little like things are like, oh yeah, I love looking at the beach at night, and like so they use that as like they use that as like ways to like set up times to skill, but they would send little notes back and forth, and that's where Verity would be like, Burge's little tomcat is doing so and so.
Yeah, they would call him tomcat as like a code word.
Mhm.
So, like, I think that her calling him Tom was very intentional.
Yeah.
He
And
And
just,
like
he doesn't know that.
he doesn't like
right,
there's no way for him to know that. And like he's like
right.
and I think even though like at the start he resents it, he carries the name of Tom Batcherlock for the rest of his life. Like,
Yeah,
Uh-huh. He
yep.
keeps the name his mama gave him.
oh, stop. It's gonna make me cry. Uh, yeah, and like um there's also after there's like the whole section with the fool, which there's a lot to talk about there, but then one like particular part from there that I always like grapple with or think about is the part where like the fool is like, you can hurt her if you choose. She feels such guilt at how alone you've been, and you look so like chivalry. Anything you say will be as if it came from his lips. She's like a gem with a flaw. One precise tap from you, and she will fly all to pieces. And I feel like at first I'm like, when I was first reading this, I was like, why is the fool saying this like this? And I think it's because, or to try to make Fitz realize, like, hey, like, you may be angry or like resentful, but she sacrificed a lot to come and help you, and the way that you're acting right now is hurting her. And you need, and like, kind of like putting that in Fitz's face to make him realize that. I think that, like, it makes Fitz kind of realize, like, oh, yeah, I'm actually seeing patience for the first time through what the fool is saying.
Well, and I think also they both have been so alone and they both are like hurting inside and like so lonely and upset that the fool says that to kind of show Fitz that like he's not the only one who's like feeling these ways and that
Mhm.
maybe Patience and Fitz can help heal each other if Fitz gives her a chance.
And we kind of see that happening at the end, where like Fitz introduces her to Fedrin, and she's like, I didn't know
Mhm.
anyone here shared my interest in like exotic papers, and like, because it's easy to forget that Patience is like just as lonely. She like literally sacrificed her, like, she had this nice cozy estate. She moves here just to be with Fitz into a court that kind of regards her as that she knows regards her as eccentric or weird, and just dislikes her all for Fitz. And it's just like, yeah, man, Patience deserve better, just like in all ways.
Yeah,
I
I agree.
am curious as to how the fool seems to know so much about the inner workings of Patience and Chivalry's relationship in Withywoods and like how she's feeling coming back. Like he has a lot of information. He says like she wanted to ra- send for you and raise you, but Chivalry said no, and she like knows that um, if she hadn't consented to his abdication, they wouldn't have been able to kill him. And she is so like sensitive about you. Like he says a lot of things here that
He
make me
probably shouldn't know.
right. Like how would he know that she wanted to send for him and Chivalry said no? How would the fool
Yeah,
know?
I
and it's like, it's not like prescience. It's not the exact same kind of like future sight that we're used to from the Fool. So
Right.
I think it's either he hears it with Shade talking to other people about it, or it's kind of like how he like at the end of the Witness Stones chapter 15, where he's like, I wasn't there, but this is how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And like it goes into full detail, explains the whole thing. You know he knows what Burrich whispered in Galen's ear,
I want to know
but
so
it's
bad.
just I think it's like I think he maybe did have dreams about Patience, and maybe he had dreams like not from the past, but like about her past when she was deciding to come to Buckkeep so that he kind of knew and had the insight that he needed to share with Fitz to kind of help blossom that relationship.
Or maybe that was like one, like, I think later on he describes it as threads.
Yeah.
Maybe it was one thread, like when Fitz came to Buckkeep, one trajectory that could have happened was her begging and Chivalry saying yes. And then he sees however that plays out. I think at one point he says like any other outcome than what happened would have led to Fitz's death. So
Yeah.
likely he would have been killed along with Chivalry. So because that didn't happen, he knows Chivalry said no to
Mhm.
her like pleading, which is very sad also.
Mhm. Yeah, and like, who was it that mentioned? Uh, oh yeah, that Alex mentioned that, like, I love that the Fool named Smithy, and it's like, I completely missed that detail. Like, I like, not missed it, but like I forgot that, like, because I remember the Fool suggested names, but I didn't remember that like the Fool was the one to eventually name him, and I just,
Well,
yeah.
he suggests to name him Forge, which is just like a
I
bad.
know.
I feel like
Cool. What the hell?
But there's
I feel
one
like the
thing.
Fool is a way more mysterious person in this book. Just like randomly popping out and being like, "Here's an ominous thing," and I'm trying to think of
And
it from
here's
the
a name for your
perspective of
dog.
like the kid we know the Fool to be at this point, and I feel like he's kind of in his like edgy phase.
Yeah.
One thing he says about Smithy, like when he suggests to name him that, he says, your heart will be hammered against him and your strength will be tempered in his fire. I was like,
And we
that's,
really see that come to play
yeah, it's such
in
a good
the
line.
later chapter.
And
Yep.
meanwhile, Fitz is like, "You're being a bit dramatic, aren't you? Weird."
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I think the second that the Fool suggests the name Smithy, like Fitz adopts that because in the next line he's like, Smithy like tried to like play with the bone that I had or something. And I'm like, well, that was fast.
Mhm.
Yep.
I think it's also probably like Fitz can also just like feel that Smithy vibed with the name, and it's like, cool,
Yeah.
hey, Smithy. Um, Another thing that I really liked is I mentioned this earlier about how Lacey is like the only one who understands children. And I love Lacey coming in and being like, "Yo, here, learn these C pipes, come back, show them to patients." And the whole line of like, "Now I've had boys of my own, and I know that boys aren't that way. They don't learn or grow or have manners when you're looking at them. But turn away and turn back, and there they are, smarter, taller, and charming everyone with their own mothers." And I love like this whole thing of like Lacey just trying to like facilitate this connection between Fitz and Patience, who she's just like, these dumb motherfuckers. They're
Yeah.
so close. They just need to like say it and like get it, and it ends up happening.
Translator.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And like Lacey with like the well placed comments of like, wow, he's kind of like you when he dozes, where like he daydreams off, and it's like, I think he painted those himself, my lady, and it's just like
I
because like,
love that little thing. I love that section where he painted Smithy for her and he said, "But when I stood outside Lady Patience's door, I looked at the papers in my hands and suddenly saw myself as a toddler presenting crushed and wilted dandelions to his mother." And I'm like, "But that's what you're doing. She's your mom." It
mhm,
was so cute in my heart. And then Patience said, like, "You should have been mine. It isn't fair. You should have been mine." Like that broke my heart. Because it's
mhm,
clear that they both want this mother-son relationship, but they don't know how to
They're like
really
afraid
make it.
mhm.
almost.
Yeah, and it's like the whole painting thing is like there's lots of stuff that like made me sad on like a first read. Obviously, like the whole patience thing that still makes me sad. The thing that hit me that I wasn't expecting here is like, so was there anything to me but being a spy or an assassin? And I feel like this is one of the last few moments in this trilogy where we actually get to see Fitz afforded the opportunity to be anything but an assassin. Later on, he just kind of spirals into that, and it it's you when you're first reading this, you don't think of it as like this will be like a one-off moment, but it upon reflection, it's like, man, he never really does get to this point of being able to explore this like artistic side, other skills that he might have, and it's like, shit, just give this kid a childhood, please.
Yeah.
I think a puppy has to do because he can't get a childhood.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that like, I guess like at the end, the balancing of tones here is actually really interesting to me because it's very sad, but she also manages to make that ending part really funny without, I feel, taking away from that sadness. Where it's like there's a whole like comedy of errors where she like trips over the dog, like headbutts
Yeah.
Fitz's chin, and then what do they say? Like howling like like a scalded cat runs away to her room. You have Lacey just
Hmm.
being like, "Yeah, this happens. She's become quite fond of you." And it's like,
Yeah. Come back tomorrow.
Yep.
and I think it's almost like the reason it works is because you still can like see it from like Fitz's and Page's perspective where it's really sad, but then you get like it almost like shifts to Lacey's perspective where it's like, ah, these silly people, they finally found a connection. Thank God. This is the start of nature is healing kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we have for this chapter?
I just had one little thing. When Patience gives Smithy to Fitz, he said how like it's like something so incredible to be like the center of someone's attention, even if it's an 8-week-old puppy. And he says, it made me realize how profoundly lonely I had felt and for how long. And I was like, oh, like that just hit me in my heart. I felt so sad for him. Because like I think he doesn't realize how lonely he is until Smithy is there giving him this attention and being like, I love you, you're amazing, you're perfect. And Fitz is like, is this how I'm supposed to feel? Like, this is connection? And you're just like, you poor baby.
Yeah, especially because like I think he doesn't understand the sort of unconditional love that other people have for him. So having this like strong wit bond where he's like able to just get it unfiltered is like, wow, someone who actually cares about me. And then like in the background, like Patience, Burrage, and Shade, like, am I a joke to you? And
Yeah,
like, but yeah, he also like I guess he has reasons not to trust them, each one of them for different reasons. But it's still sad.
yeah,
Yeah.
They also never tell him how they feel about him. Like, he thinks Burrich just takes care of him as out of some sort of duty.
Location.
to chivalry.
Yeah, like he doesn't think that Burrich cares about him. And anytime they get close to like realizing that they care about each other, they say or do something to like mess it up.
Yeah, they were in the moment.
Yep. So I think
We're
like
about to see a great example of that.
Yeah,
first thing in his life that's like, I love you. Or since Nosy.
yeah.
So
Something that I was wondering, like she describes Smithy so differently from Nosy. Like Smithy, I feel like is so much more aware and like he's like not like a person, but I feel like he's got more thought and like awareness of himself and others around him than Nosy
yeah.
did. And I like wonder, like, is that something do you guys think is significant? Like, or
I
is
think
that
that
just
there's
kind of
probably
how
like,
his personality grew?
I
do they
wonder if
mention at
it's
some point that like some animals have more proclivity for like the wit, just like humans have more proclivity for the wit? And I think it
Yeah.
might be something like that.
that could be, but I think part of it is Fitz's age too, because as we get on in the story, like people, other old blood people always say like you shouldn't bond as a kid because it can kind of mess both you and the animal up because you're not mature enough. And Fitz is quote unquote bonding with Nosy when he's like 6. He doesn't really
Yeah, so
have
they just
a whole
become
lot of
one
like,
thing.
yeah, he doesn't have a whole lot of sense of self because he's only 6, but by now he's probably about 14. He has more of like an awareness, and that
So
could reflective Smithy.
maybe Smithy becomes more like Fitz when Fitz was with Nosy, Fitz was becoming more like Nosy.
Yeah, that could be.
For sure. I do also think that like even though Fitz is older, there's something else going on because he mentions that like, hey, the other dogs and even the other puppies that Patience has don't have that kind of like
Perception.
awareness, perception, or
Yeah.
awareness. So there's definitely I also think that like Fitz has grown up and is more talented with the wit or more aware of the wit as a separate thing. But there's something going on with Smithy for sure. Okay, and I think with that we can move on to chapter 14, Galen.
Yuck.
Um, mhm. And I like the note you made here, Alex, where it's just like 3 chapters in a row that are just characters' names.
Yeah, I was writing them in to the document right after we'd finished the last episode, and I'm like, this is so weird. But I guess it kind of, I mean, it makes sense because those are the 3 most important and pivotal things in those chapters. So why the heck not name them the names?
For sure. I think the first thing that's important here is this sort of cautionary conversation between Birch and Fitz. And like the I hate that like Fitz's thought when Birch calls him is I went to him wondering what chore I had done poorly and I would be rebuked for it. It's just like, no, Fitz.
He's like,
Why?
I'm in trouble again. I wonder what it is this time.
Ugh.
This is one of those instances where you start to get close to realizing, or Fitz starts to get close to realizing, Burrich cares about him. And as a reader, you kind of know when he says, "Oh, Fitz, my son, be careful, be wise." Like, he calls him my son.
Yes.
And then, like, they're just so close. And then Birch is like, "Don't shame me." And then Fitz is like, "Oh, of course, you just are saying this because if something happened to me, it would be an
It would look bad
embarrassment."
on you.
Yeah.
And he's like, and
It's just,
for a moment I wondered because it sounded as though he feared for me, and I'm like, Fitz, you dumb
He does,
motherfucker.
you dumbass.
it's like, this is one of those instances where he's such an unreliable narrator, because I remember when I first read this trilogy, I also thought that Burrich was just like, I have to take care of this kid. And it wasn't till, I believe it's Assassin's Quest, when he's like crying to Molly and he's like, I loved him like my own son, and I thought about putting him on my horse and taking him out to Withy Woods to get him away from the castle and blah blah blah. Like, that was, I didn't realize until then, when Fitz is also realizing that Burrich like
Oh shit.
loves him.
You
Yeah.
didn't realize after the next chapter? Okay, I'm gonna have words, dude. I'm actually tearing up just thinking about that chapter. That shit all like.
I know.
Okay, when we get there, I'll talk more about it. But yeah. Another thing
Birch
that I
is a
wanted.
savage, and I love it.
I know. I want to, like, I love, I have a love-hate relationship with Burrich because there's so many things that I hate about how hypocritical he is, but like, he's such a badass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If only he didn't have like generational self-loathing that he passes on to Fitz,
Right.
things would be real great.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he mentions the skill. Your father touched me with it. It seemed he knew my heart before I did, and saw things that I kept buried even from myself. Now, okay, given the context, it's fair to assume that this is probably either about the wit or chivalry knowing about Burge's feelings for Patience. But also, I totally thought that this was like gay when I first read this, especially since Burge
Ooh,
like
it
blushes
could
right
be.
afterwards. I was
I
like,
think it definitely could be. Like, I think that Birch had a thing for both chivalry and patience.
Maybe they were a throuple.
Or Birch
like,
wanted to be, and
mhm,
I could see that. I would love that so much. And
I
that's why
know.
Birch mourns so badly and so, like, much when chivalry dies, because that was his man in more ways than one.
pretty much.
Someone write thick.
Especially when like there's later where like I think it was in chapter 15 where he's like, sometimes you look at me with my lord's eyes, and it's like,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
um, another thing that I noted from this chapter is in the Queen's Garden, given how like traumatic this space ends up being for Fitz, like not just as like bad stuff happened here, but as like there's like literal echoes of like maybe I should just jump off this tower like for his like for like
Mhm.
a lot of his life. I kind of wish we got to see more of like a catharsis with when Ketrican ends up like remodeling it and rebuilding it later on. I think that does end up happening later on if I'm remembering the right
Yeah.
plays.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it would be really cool. That would be another cool moment for Ketrican and him to get to bond. Um, and it would also help him like get over that because like Galen's training takes place over the course of like 2 chapters in this book, but again, it has such ripple effects throughout the rest of his life.
Oh,
Um,
definitely. That's the first big moment of trauma that Fitz experiences for sure.
so we're going to be heading off for now, and then next week we're going to be coming back, finishing off a little bit of chapter 14, um, and then getting on to chapters 15 through probably either 19 or 20, depending on how timing ends up. But
Yeah.
yeah, thanks y'all for joining us, and see you next week.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.